In every city, there are men and women who hold power not through politics or money alone, but through the way they stand between life and death. Dr. Jack Harrison was one of those men. A millionaire surgeon with hands steady as steel and a reputation as sharp as a scalpel. He lived in a world where every second mattered, where his decisions determined who lived to see another sunrise. To the outside world, he was brilliance personified, confident, untouchable, and undeniably successful. But behind the polished exterior, there was a truth few dared to whisper. Jack Harrison knew how to save lives, yet he had forgotten how to live his own. Day after day, he walked through the pristine halls of his hospital, his name carried like a banner of hope and fear. Nurses admired his skill, patients revered his genius, but colleagues often shrank beneath his arrogance. To Jack, every surgery was a battlefield, and he was the general who never lost. Yet victories brought him no joy, only another notch in his record. Gratitude from patients slid off him like water, their tears, their prayers, their desperate thanks. None of it touched him. Life to him was numbers, precision, outcomes. His heart had been locked away so long that even he had forgotten what it meant to feel. Arrogance had become his mask. He wore it with ease, convincing the world that he needed nothing and no one beyond his own brilliance. Wealth fueled his confidence, status fed his pride, and control was his addiction. But deep inside, there was a hollowness he refused to acknowledge. He had mastered the art of saving others, but he could not rescue himself from the loneliness that shadowed him at night. The mansion, the cars, the applause, they were trophies of a man admired by all, but truly known by none. What made Jack's story powerful was not just his success, but the emptiness that accompanied it. The world saw a man at the top of his field, but what they could not see was the fatigue etched into his soul, the silence of a life without real connection. He had learned to detach because caring too deeply felt dangerous. To care meant to risk. To feel meant to lose control. And Jack Harrison never allowed himself to lose control. His heart was not closed because it was incapable of love. It was closed because love made him vulnerable, and vulnerability was the one thing he could not afford. But life has a way of stripping away the masks we hide behind. For all his brilliance and pride, destiny was waiting with a test that no degree, no wealth, no reputation could prepare him for. A single encounter, one patient unlike any other, would begin to pull at the threads of the armor he had worn for years. He did not know it then, but the man who lived only to save lives was about to discover what it truly meant to be saved. Mia Thompson entered Jack Harrison's world like a quiet storm, unnoticed at first, but impossible to ignore once she was near. She did not carry the air of wealth, influence, or prestige that filled his hospital's private wings. There was no entourage, no family name that demanded respect, no polished armor of privilege. She arrived with little more than her fragile body and an unshakable dignity that no illness could strip away. To Jack, who was used to patients begging for his attention or bowing beneath his authority, Mia was different. She did not tremble before his arrogance, nor did she attempt to flatter his ego. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at him. And for the first time in years, he felt seen not as a doctor, not as a millionaire, but as a man. There was something in her presence that disarmed him. She did not challenge him with anger, nor did she worship him with awe. Her strength was quieter, deeper. Even in weakness, she carried herself with grace. Her gratitude was genuine, not desperate. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. When she spoke to him, it was without fear of offending, without the trembling obedience he had grown accustomed to. She treated him as though he were human, not a god in a white coat. That single shift, that refusal to place him on a pedestal, was enough to unsettle the man who had built his life on control. For Jack, Mia became a mirror. In her calm defiance, he began to see the hollowness of his own existence. She reminded him of the compassion he had lost along the way, of the humanity he had buried beneath wealth and pride. It was not her illness that struck him most, but the courage with which she carried it. Her fragility did not make her weak. It made her unbreakable in ways he had never understood. She faced pain with a bravery he could not ignore, and in doing so, she quietly exposed the truth he had hidden from himself, that all his brilliance meant nothing if it did not come with heart. Jack had spent years building walls around himself, walls of arrogance and precision, believing that feelings would only slow him down. Yet Mia stepped past those walls without even trying. She did not demand entry, she simply walked through with honesty, and the walls began to crumble. He found himself lingering in her presence longer than necessary, listening when he usually brushed patience aside, thinking about her words long after he left the room. It was as if she carried a light into the cold corridors of his soul, revealing the emptiness he had tried to ignore. What startled Jack most was not that she changed how he saw her, but that she changed how he saw himself. For the first time in years, he questioned whether saving lives was enough. For the first time, he wondered if he himself was worth saving. And in that silent realization, Jack Harrison, the arrogant millionaire surgeon, began to feel the stirrings of something he had long forgotten, the fragile, dangerous, life-altering pull of the human heart. For Jack Harrison, money had always been the answer. From the time he first wore his white coat to the day his name was etched into the walls of the most prestigious hospitals, wealth had followed him like a shadow. Every problem seemed solvable with enough resources, every obstacle removable with enough influence. It was the silent force that gave him authority, and the armor that protected his pride. But when Mia Thompson entered his life, Jack was confronted with a truth he had never been forced to face before. Money could not solve everything. Her illness was not just a medical challenge, it was a test of values. And in that test, Jack discovered that real worth had nothing to do with numbers in a bank account. Mia lived in a world where every expense mattered, where each treatment carried not just physical but financial pain. To Jack, the cost of a procedure was an afterthought, barely more than a detail in a larger equation. But to Mia, it was the difference between hope and despair, survival and surrender. She did not ask for his wealth, did not reach for the easy rescue his fortune could offer. Instead, she carried her pride like a shield, determined to face her battles with dignity. And that refusal shook Jack in a way no opposition ever had. For the first time, he stood before someone who could not be bought, whose spirit resisted the power of his money, and whose worth was measured not in riches, but in resilience. The tension between Jack's world and Mia's world became a battlefield he could not ignore. He was used to controlling outcomes, but this was different. He could write a check to cover her treatment, yet she would not let him. He could offer solutions wrapped in luxury, yet she would reject them. Her strength forced him to question the foundation of his own life. Was his generosity about kindness, or was it about control? Was his wealth a tool for good, or had it become a weapon of arrogance? These questions haunted him, dismantling the certainty he once lived by. It was in the quiet moments, in the spaces between surgeries and conversations, that Jack began to realize the truth. Worth was not found in the size of his fortune, but in the sacrifices he was willing to make. It was not about what he could buy for her, but about what he could give of himself. His time, his honesty, his heart. Mia's refusal to be defined by her need forced Jack to see beyond the surface. She was teaching him that dignity mattered more than charity, that strength was not in what you had, but in what you endured. In the end, the battle between wealth and worth was not about money at all. It was about transformation. Jack had lived his life believing his value came from his success, his skill, his fortune. But through Mia, he began to see that the truest wealth was compassion, that the greatest currency was love, and that the highest form of saving a life was not found in surgery, but in selflessness. What Mia gave him was a truth he had never been forced to face. Wealth may open doors, but only worth can open hearts. Love has a way of creeping into places where it does not seem to belong. In the sterile halls of hospitals, where life and death hang in the balance, it is easy to believe that emotions have no place, that feelings are distractions in a world of precision and science. For Jack Harrison, this belief had been law. He had trained himself to stay detached, to measure success in statistics, to treat patients as cases rather than souls. But Mia Thompson changed that law without even trying. Somewhere between the late-night checkups, the quiet conversations, and the moments when her courage met his skill, something began to shift. What started as the bond between doctor and patient began to grow into something neither of them could deny: love. It was not an instant revelation, but a gradual awakening. Jack found himself listening more closely to her voice, drawn not just to the symptoms she described, but to the spirit behind her words. He lingered by her bedside longer than he intended, not because her health demanded it, but because his heart did. He noticed the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of the dreams she still carried despite her illness, the way her laughter filled the sterile room with warmth that no medicine could provide. In those moments, Jack realized he was no longer simply treating a patient. He was learning to feel again. For Mia, the transformation was just as profound. In Jack, she had first seen arrogance, the kind of pride that builds walls higher than mountains. But behind the surgeon's mask, she began to glimpse a man who was slowly unraveling, discovering pieces of himself he had long buried. She saw the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes when she was in pain, the tenderness in his gestures when he thought no one was watching. His wealth and power meant nothing to her. It was his humanity, raw and imperfect, that touched her. And in loving her, Jack was learning what it meant to be human again. Love became the cure neither of them expected. It did not erase the illness, nor did it promise a life without trials. But it gave them strength, a strength deeper than science, stronger than fear. For Jack, love humbled him, reminding him that his hands could heal bodies, but his heart could heal souls. For Mia, love gave her hope, a reason to keep fighting, a reminder that she was more than her sickness, more than her fragility. Together, they discovered that love could be medicine in its own right, not one prescribed in doses, but one lived in every shared breath, every moment of trust, every sacrifice made for each other. In the quiet glow of those moments, Jack realized that love was not a weakness, as he had once believed, but the greatest power of all. It was the only cure that reached beyond the body into the depths of the soul. It healed wounds he didn't know he carried, restored faith he thought was lost, and gave him a life that felt fuller than any accolade or fortune could ever provide. Love had become the cure, and it was rewriting both of their lives in ways no medical textbook could ever explain. Legacies are not built from wealth alone, nor are they secured by titles, awards, or the admiration of strangers. True legacies are carved into the lives we touch, the hearts we change, and the love we leave behind. For Jack Harrison, this truth unfolded slowly, shaped not by the countless lives he had saved in operating rooms, but by one woman who saved him in ways he never thought possible. Mia Thompson was not a figure of power, not a name that carried influence, but she became the cornerstone of his transformation. And in that transformation, the Jack discovered that the greatest legacy he could leave was not his fortune, but his love. Jack had lived much of his life believing his achievements were enough. His name was spoken with reverence in medical circles, his success envied by peers, his wealth a shield against doubt. But when he met Mia, he came to understand that none of it would matter if his heart remained untouched. The mansion, the cars, the applause, they would fade, as all material things do. But the way he chose to love, the way he allowed himself to be changed, would live on in those who knew him. Mia showed him that love was not about perfection or permanence. It was about presence. It was about showing up with honesty, even when life was fragile and uncertain. Together, Jack and Mia built something deeper than success. It was not a perfect story. There were struggles, setbacks, and moments of doubt. Yet every challenge became a reminder of what truly mattered. Jack, once the man who measured his worth in victories and wealth, began to measure it in smiles, in moments of connection, in the quiet peace of knowing he was no longer alone. Mia, who carried the weight of illness with such grace, became a symbol of strength not only for him but for everyone who saw how love could turn weakness into resilience. Their journey reminded those around them that the human heart is not defined by what it endures, but by how it continues to love despite the pain. The legacy they created was not written in medical journals or financial ledgers, but in the lives they touched together. Patients who once saw Jack as untouchable now saw a doctor capable of compassion. Friends who once thought him cold began to witness warmth in his eyes. And above all, Mia herself carried forward the truth that love can transform even the hardest of hearts. Their story became a testimony that healing does not end at the closing of a wound. It continues in the way we live, in the way we give, in the way we love. As time passed, Jack realized that love had given him something no fortune ever could: immortality in memory. For even when life moved on, their bond would live in the stories told, in the people inspired, in the example set. A legacy written in love is the only one that time cannot erase. And in choosing love over pride, compassion over arrogance, and humanity over ego, Jack Harrison finally became more than a brilliant surgeon. He became a man whose true greatness was measured not in wealth, but in the love he gave and the love he left behind.